Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of the Been There, Done That podcast. And today on the podcast, we're joined by Amber Rhinehart, who is an experienced international educator and middle years program coordinator. Over the course of her career, Amber has taught in Cambodia, Ghana, and Uganda, and Bangladesh.
Germany too.
Germany, okay. And she has also facilitated in school workshops and supported MYP projects for schools across Africa and India.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Misha.
Yeah, so that was a kind of like a small introduction of like who you are and for the people obviously listening to the podcast or watching it. But this podcast is not about school. It's about crazy stories and moments that shape you. So could you please explain or talk about like where you grew up, siblings, your hobbies, and just how your life was, before this crazy moment that shaped you.
Yeah, so this moment happened in 2016. So I was an adult when it happened. But I grew up in the U.S. state of Maine, which borders Canada, the Atlantic Ocean, and New Hampshire. I had a pretty idyllic childhood in the sense that, I grew up in the 80s, and that was a time when kids were just sent outside, right? And we lived in a dead-end street. There was all the neighborhood kids would go meander around. Like, we had a forest in the back of the neighborhood as well, and we were constantly doing terrible, we're like building fires in the middle of the forest at 8 years old, which probably I can say to my mom, I probably couldn't say that back then. But one of the families had a dog named Benji that would go around with us. We played street hockey on the streets. And then in winter we were outside all day playing in the snow. So it was a really sort of carefree kind of childhood in that sort of sense. I didn't have a lot of boundaries. There are a lot of religious boundaries on me, actually, or like gender-based boundaries. I had two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother, but I could play outside.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I grew up in a very religious Christian household, very conservative household, and that has to do kind of later on to this incident in 2016. And part of that, my father was a journalist with the Portland Press Herald, which was the largest newspaper in Maine. He started as a reporter straight out of, after he fought in Vietnam and when he came out of the Army.
Wow, okay.
My parents went on their honeymoon to Maine. They were originally from a state called Pennsylvania, and they fell in love. My dad got a job, they bought a house, and they stayed. And my whole family is still there. We actually own a lake house there too, so it is home.
Yeah.
And he ended up sort of when we were born, he ended up being an editorial writer and an editor of the newspaper, which is sort of the opinion pages of any newspaper. And he had a weekly column and was kind of a leading conservative voice in the state of Maine.
Yeah.
Very well known. He was also syndicated with the Maine Wire, which is a very conservative, very right-wing online publication. But we grew up going to church every week. We were confirmed. We were the family that prayed at restaurants before we ate. We had weekly Bible studies with other families. And my parents, whether religion or gender education, it's hard sometimes to parse things out.
Yeah.
But we would never, for example, like we would visit friends we grew up in a Lutheran church, which is a sect of Christianity, but we would never, even if we went to visit friends in another Lutheran church and there was a female pastor, we wouldn't take communion from her.
Okay.
So that sort of, my little brother was allowed to do things before I was allowed to do things.
Yeah.
Because I'm a girl, and that was stated very blatantly to me. And so anyway, at 18, I went to school 14 hours by car away. I ended up doing studies abroad in England. And at 24, I got my first job at the International School of Phnom Penh in Cambodia. Yeah. And that year, 2009, I sort of stayed. I stayed teaching abroad for that. Since then, and I was I was angry at my parents for that, sort of what I considered unfair. I mean, my brothers, they benefited from it, right? I did all the housework. I did.
I mean, I guess they're not too sad. I mean,
I mean, now my brothers see it, right? But they, when you're 12 and your 15-year-old sister has to do the dishes and and make all of it, they're like, sweet, all right. So I didn't have a lot of empathy or even sympathy from them at the time, but definitely now I do. They could go to concerts before I could go to concerts, right? And one time we wanted to see like a jazz legend, and I wasn't even allowed to go to a jazz concert at like a local community college. I'm like, it's innocent, it's an innocent So I grew up with a lot of resentment in that, I have to say, and a lot of resentment. And my mom was a mechanic for a while. She also worked in our school district as a secretary and in various roles. And I was really also resentful of her for that. There was a lot of things that my mom could do that my dad couldn't. Like if you wanted something fixed, you asked my mom. If you wanted help with your homework, you asked my dad. He was very much an intellectual, couldn't do anything with his hands, right? I mean, my mom and I would, install the new screen door, or she was the one who changed the oil in my car, and my dad was not that person. And I think maybe some of those differences, my parents ended up divorcing when I was 22. And my dad remarried to my stepmom, who is just a wonderful, wonderful woman. We say she's not the extra person. She's what was missing in our family, and she's lovely. And they were married until he died in 2016. And so, I forged my own path with teaching abroad, and I could see my family every summer, but it was something that I love living abroad. I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world to have this life of teaching abroad and then raising my children in it as well. And I met Mr. J in 2005, and he had grown up abroad as well. Like he grew up as a third culture kid in Kenya, went to the International School of Kenya, which I know is a huge rival, I'm sure, of ASL, right? But that's where he went to school, and and during his formative years, that shaped him a lot. And it was, I met him in Ghana when we were there in 2005, and I already knew that there were certain parts about him that I could relate to. So fast forward to 2016, or maybe I should go back. We'll fast forward to 2016 in just a second. Yeah. But then, growing up, my father, my father was, he was so well known. And there were a couple instances in some of his views that really stirred the public. And one specific incident was, I was in 5th grade at the time. So that was 1985 or 86. And it was the height of the AIDS epidemic. They had just changed the name from the GRIDS epidemic, which stands for gay-related immune deficiency syndrome, to, acute, right? So we're just kind of in that time. And when, a lot of homosexual men are dying from this disease that we didn't quite understand. At that time, it was when the AIDS quilt was, it was a quilt that people, often mothers, or sisters or aunts, would make for, but not always, but they would make these sort of squares of these quilts for their family members who had died of AIDS. And this quilt, it was massive, right? If you were to go to I don't know what your gym is called at ASL, but like if you were to go there, it would fill the floor. It would be hanging from the ceilings, at parts. Right? It was huge. And parts of it would tour the US to sort of raise awareness of this terrible, terrible disease, and try to raise money for federal funding for research. And my father wrote an article that said that this shouldn't be displayed, that people who got AIDS deserved it. And, as a 10-year-old, I just didn't understand. I didn't understand. Yeah. And then that night after that article came out, somebody went and spray painted horrific messages all over the quilts, all over the gym. And it was awful. And I only know that now. I didn't know that then, right? And at that point, we were, my father was getting death threats, and there was kidnapping threats for the children. And I only know that because my mom sent me a letter to my teacher and I opened it and read it because I was like, I'm that kind of kid. But I was like, when you're little, there's certain sorts of stages that we have in our life when we realize our parents are different than us, right? 7 years old is a big time, and kids often have like nightmares at time because they realize that like they're not one with their parents, and their parents are going to die, right? There's a mortality and sort of that, and that sort of comes between 7 and 10. And then I realized, my father is fallible. And I didn't know that before because I didn't know any, I'm 10. I didn't know that. I had the same beliefs my parents had, and it was at that point that I was like, oh. And, we didn't have Google back then, right? So I was up early because I was the one who had to feed all the cats and empty the dishwasher and make all the lunches for my brothers in the morning. Oh. And I know, you're very sweet, Misha. But I took the newspaper and started reading the newspaper. And it was something I hadn't done before. And it really, I didn't express my differences with my family until I was more 15, 16 years old. But I started to kind of take notes. And then, you fast forward to 2016, and now you have a career that has spanned from 1970 to 2016 of these, not always these articles, right? He wrote a beautiful article about me when I first went to university that I still have, that I adore and love. When my cat died, he wrote a lovely article about, what happens when we lose pets.
Yeah.
People are complicated, and it's not just black and white, right? He was still my dad. So in 2016, at this point, he was retired from the newspaper, still writing for these sort of online publications. And they had, my dad and my stepmom had joined an evangelical church in southern Maine. And there was a family there that were really just down on their luck. I think there was some mental illness within the family, but they couldn't hold sort of regular jobs. And they were homeschooling their kids. My father at the church actually had a school. My dad was teaching history, and he was teaching English, of course. And my stepmom is brilliant at math. She was teaching math and science there as well. But it was a tiny school. There must have been a handful of kids who attended this school. And that family had a 16-year-old son. And at one point, the father was pretty handy in that family. And at one point, my dad decided to negotiate they wanted to sell their house, so redoing the floors in their upstairs, and my dad was going to then trade, I think, 3 handguns. So another part of my life growing up was guns. We started shooting like target practice with 22 rifles, I think when I was 7 or 8, and I desperately wanted to play the piano. And my dad said, for every year that you shoot, if you shoot for the next 4 years, I will give you 4 years of piano lessons. And I was just desperate. I so loved music. I don't know if Mr. J's played the ukulele for you or anything but he grew up in a very musical family. And I did not. But I wanted so bad. So I shot guns for 4 years. I was also going to Christian camps in summer, like summer camps, and I would beat all the boys. Women or females in general, if they can control their breath we're actually better shooters or more accurate shooters than men because we have smaller lung capacities. Yeah. And I would take home trophies all the time, much to the chagrin of all the other boys. And my dad was so proud, right? But I was like, there's a means to this, and this is why I'm doing it. I was like a junior National Rifle Association member. Like, I didn't want it, but I knew, whether it's, I don't know if it's calculated, but I was like, fine, I'll do it. And I got my piano lessons for 4 years. And he came to those, my recitals and stuff, and I loved it. I loved it. But my dad also collected guns. And particularly, and there must have been more threats to my family than I knew about. Certainly there wouldn't be something that we talked about at dinner, but I knew about that one. And over the years, he collected more and more and more. And by the time 2016 rolled around, there must have been 50 guns in that house. And everything from 22 rifles or BB guns to, I don't think we had any, I don't even know actually if there were automatic ones, but there were definitely pistols. And so my dad was down. So when his family came over to check out the floor to see what needed to be done, my dad was downstairs in his kind of office area with this 16-year-old son, showing him the guns. And, a man like my father comes to be who he is because of hubris. I mean, it's part of it, right? Because of his sort of unbelievable self-confidence in himself. And you have to be, right? If you are a minority voice or you are a controversial voice, like you just have to have that type of personality. And at that point, he ended up, it was a 6-bullet handgun. And so he opened the chamber, hit the bullets out in his hand, shut it, and then gave it to this young man. I'm really trying not to say names. So he handed it to this young boy. So if you hear me, catch over my words, it's because I'm trying not to use any identification. So he handed over to this young 16-year-old boy. And because of also, there's hubris and there's self-confidence, but there's also paranoia. There's a reason why you have 50 guns in your house. I mean, he had them in we would go for barbecues and he would have them in this like apron pocket. Like, I mean, they were, stuffed in sweaters. Like, even after he died, we found them. I pulled out his favorite book of poetry and there was a handgun behind it, right? We were still finding guns, they weren't all in the safe. For that matter.
Yeah, and so guns are not that cheap.
No. And we're going to get to that in just a second, actually. We'll get to that point. So he handed it to the 6-year-old boy who hadn't held a gun before. And because of my father's paranoia, he shaved down some of the trigger, which actually means it has less resistance. So you don't have to pull it as much. And there certainly weren't any safeties on any of these guns. And when this young boy held it, he grabbed it by the trigger, opposed to holding it in his hand or just holding the handle. And there was one bullet left in that chamber, one bullet left in the round, and it happened to be in the chamber at the time. And because of the way, when he pulled it, the gun reverberated, it hit my father in the, I don't even know the name of this artery, catharic or cataratic or something, I forget. It's one of the main arteries that you have running. You have the artery in the vein, and it's that main one that runs down most of your body. And he hit him in there, and in 10 seconds he bled out and died.
Yeah.
And when we were in Bangkok at the time, I was actually supposed to have knee surgery. Because we were sort of so far ahead. So it was sometime in the afternoon in the States. My brother called me in the morning. I'm ready to go into surgery at like 12 that day. We were with the kids even, and my brother's like, Dad died. It was an accident. I think he fell off a roof. Like, he didn't even have the whole story, right? He was like, I'm going down there now. And I was like, oh my God, I have to cancel my surgery. I have to come home. And that's exactly what I did. And as the day went out, I mean, it hit the news very quickly. And then it blew up. And when I got to my dad and stepmom's house, media was everywhere. And protesters were everywhere. There's people act differently when deaths are traumatic, right? When your grandma at 85 dies, it's super sad. And I don't want to say that it's not, but when she dies of, something at 85, people know how to react to that. But in cases of trauma, like when somebody has died of suicide or died in this manner, it's awkward, and I get that. And but it was so strange to see some of my childhood friends or go back home, or people didn't know what to say. And then of course when it hit the media, everybody knew it. Everybody knew about it. Yeah. So we had a pretty, and of course, as a family, you're trying to plan a funeral, right? How do you write? And I wrote the eulogy, right? And how do you capture a life? Because it's not how somebody dies when it's your loved one means so much less than how somebody lived. And so I tried to capture my father, who I knew as a father, right? I mean, his professional life and his views they're not mine, but what is mine is he's my dad, you know? And so trying to capture that in a really, in a humane way that also allows people to be comfortable with the nature of the death itself was really hard. It was really hard. And, you know, with your own grief and whatnot. And then, of course, like trying to go see my stepmom and support her. And I have to wade through cameras and like wade through people who were really mad. You know, we actually had protesters at the funeral. And, you know, my dad was in the Army. He was enlisted for 3 years in Vietnam, and then was in the National Guard for the next 20. And so in the States, there's a couple motorcycle gangs that are Vietnam vets, and they did what's called like a flag guard, I think it is. So we had all these like huge men with bushy beards and their girlfriends or wives, like, and it was all the American flag or POW or, you know, whatever. Not whatever, but like it was so out of my comfort zone and what I see, you know, living in Cambodia, living in Ghana, I was like, where am I? As they're bringing out the casket, because they're hiding. I mean, they were protecting me. And I was just like, they didn't say a word to me, you know, but it was so surreal to have this motorcycle gang who was my dad's age, you know, they were in their 60s and 70s, pull up to my dad's funeral and create this sort of flag guard so we could bring the coffin to the hearse in peace. And there was so much about that I was so thankful for, you know, that people that, you know, I don't live their life, and yet they came and supported my family. And like, it was really lovely in that sort of sense. And then you asked about these guns. And so as we were cleaning out the house, you know, going through his stuff and whatnot, like I have a couple of my dad's pledge shirts that he wore all the time that I love. He was also a big fan of baseball caps. I have a couple of his, and they're all worn and like dirty, you know, at the headline, you know, but I love them, right? They're my dad. So I have those. And of course, when I graduated from Hopkins, and I gave him like a, you know, Johns Hopkins, like dad cap, and like I wear that one. They're like, you're not a dad. I'm like, I know, but it's more mine, like, you know. So I mean, there's parts of people, I think, that we can keep with us in sort of small ways. But then, you know, there were so many guns found, and that was so basically we sold our part of the guns, which was thousands of dollars, and I ended up donating it to the Maine Coalition of Gun Safety, because they do a lot of educational and outreach programs, but they also offer free safeties to people with guns, and particularly in houses with children. And so our money just went to them. And I did put in memory of MD Harmon, who is my father, because I was like, I love you, Dad, but I'm gonna, this is my last, joke's on you, you know, kind of thing. So anyway, so that's what we did with our portion of the gun money. Yeah. So, I mean, it changed everything about how I deal with conflict, how I deal with stress. I mean, I was that perfectionist teacher where if they were like, oh, surprise fire alarm today, and I was like, we can't do that. How come you can't surprise us with it? Like, I would get like incensed about it, or like the copier wouldn't work. I would be, you know, I had this sort of short fuse of frustration when things didn't go my way. And afterwards I was like, nobody died today. Like, no, you know, and like, it calmed me.